Hi, Money Magicians. How are you? So, welcome to episode 49 of the Money Magic podcast. If you've just joined and you don't know who I am, my name is Bangile Makwakwa, and I help women of color heal ancestral money trauma so that they can fall in love with their bank accounts, increase income, and live their best lives. I'm also the author of Heart, Mind, and Money Using Emotional Intelligence for Financial Success and the founder of Wealthy Money. Usually, on this podcast, which is how this podcast started, I have my clients and my students come through and share their journey around changing their financial story and their money story and healing and their healing process, because healing is a journey, right? You don't quite arrive. It's something that we're doing most times. And for today, though, you guys have had me talk to Agnes, you've had me talk to Casey, and I've spoken to them about from the mastermind that I'm part of. I've told you guys a little bit about this mastermind on this podcast. Well, I have another guest that is from our mastermind, and her name is Lisa. So welcome, Lisa. Thank you for saying yes to being interviewed on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here and to be a part of your work, and I can't wait.
Yeah. Oh, wow. So please tell us what you do. Who are you? What are your hobbies? The works. Let us know you a little bit more.
Yeah. So my name is Lisa Kuzman. I live in Rapid City, South Dakota in the US. I am a leadership coach and I teach coaches how to be trauma sensitive, as well as offer business owners who have complex history of trauma coaching in a trauma sensitive manner, because there are many things about the way that we do business, how business, the world of entrepreneurship from a high risk threshold perspective that can really push your buttons, activate you, or legitimately trigger your trauma if you have a history of trauma. And I find a lot of entrepreneurs do have a history of trauma. We can end up feeling like there's something wrong with us because we can't do something the way maybe our peers are doing. We make money really fast or we make money really slow. There's many different things that we can be challenged with in entrepreneurship. And when we don't know the way that trauma is at play, it can be very confusing. And so I offer trauma sensitive business and leadership coaching for entrepreneurs. I'm very, very passionate about my work. So that is a little bit about my work. I'm a former social worker. So I practice social work. I worked within the Veterans Administration system here. I worked in hospice, I worked in nursing homes, and I did a lot of work in the geriatrics and end of life care space, which of course is the roots of where I come from with my passion around trauma. I'm also a trauma survivor. So I have my own experience as well. So a little bit about me. I love to drink craft beer. I enjoy hiking and being outdoors. I have a golden retriever who's sleeping under my desk. Hopefully she doesn't bark during this interview.
I love golden retrievers.
Oh, she's
They
so
are the
sweet.
most gorgeous dogs.
Yeah, maybe she'll jump up on the chair behind me and you might be able to see her. Her
Okay.
name is Coda and she's 7 years old. And I always call her my favorite friend because she's my favorite friend. I have a lot of great friends in my life, but she is my favorite.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Oh, yes, yes. Definitely love golden retrievers. When I was a little kid, for some reason, despite my mom's many things, like one thing that my mom did was, one thing my mom loves is animals. So my sister and I had two pet pigs growing up. They would sleep in our bedroom. Don't recommend, guys. They had like one room in the house where they would do their business. This is like an absolute true story. And my mom named them after my sister and I and gifted us with these pet pigs. Why were pigs sleeping in our beds? I don't know, but we got them. Their mom passed on when they were born. So my mom gave them to us as little babies, like when they were like maybe a few days old, to look after them. So we really attached, and they would follow us everywhere thinking that we were the parents. And like, it was really funny. And also we had like 7 dogs, which was intense. But I grew to like have a really soft spot for dogs, Labradors. So that's why I'm like, oh my God, golden retrievers. And yeah, all these animals. Oh, and we also had like a cat, like Snowball. And this cat would, so we had cat, pigs, dogs. Oh, yeah, no, don't, like my family members would come visit and they were horrified. They were like, what is going on in this house? It was, they literally felt like it was the most horrific story. But anyway, also probably part of the reason. Actually, the pigs is also why I went vegan in my teens. It's a very, very crazy thing. Like the whole experience after that, I was like, yeah, that's it for me and meat. Like, because I realized that pigs were so intelligent, and I was like, my little babies, how can people eat you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Lisa, how did you come to do this work? So you do have a social work background, and you do have trauma of your own, but why in particular did you choose business owners and teaching them to be trauma sensitive?
Yeah. So I I went into my business full time in 2016, right at the height of the Me Too movement. And
Mm.
I had gotten married, I had moved, my husband started his new job. I went into entrepreneurship full time for my social work career, all in the same 6 weeks. And
What?
yes, and then all of a sudden we're in the midst of the 2016 presidential election in the US, and the Me Too movement is like just going crazy on the internet.
Yeah.
And I have a variety of traumas in my past, and one of them is connected to sexual abuse and sexual assault. And so I was really triggered by that. And
Mm.
I went to therapy and was doing work with an I went through a process of EMDR, which is a
Yeah.
therapy specifically for helping trauma survivors process through and um, heal basically from trauma. So that was
Mm.
the first part where I knew I'd had a trauma history. I had worked with veterans with PTSD. And it was when I worked with veterans and saw the way that PTSD worked that I realized, and this was years before when I went through EMDR, I realized, oh my goodness, I think I have PTSD. Because the things that they were describing as I was supporting them from a mental health perspective,
Mm.
I realized that I experienced those things as well. So a couple
Sure.
years later, when the Me Too movement
Yeah.
started occurring, I had a very good friend of mine who was a therapist who had also gone through EMDR, said, I really think you need to consider this, because I was like not okay. I was totally not okay. I was a hot mess. So then I get through that first part of trauma healing, and it had a major impact on my ability to like manage my relationship, manage triggers. I had a lot of intrusive thoughts, um, a lot of
Mm.
fear stuff going on that was
Mm.
irrational, of course, because it was connected to
Yes.
trauma. And so a couple years later, I've been running my business. I wasn't making very much money, if any,
Yeah.
and I was working 60 hours a week. And I had a mentor of mine say, if you want to have your business be a business and earn an income, a living wage, and not be like a hobby, you have to raise your rates.
Yes.
And I was like, okay.
Yeah.
And I couldn't do it. So
Mm.
I literally had to go back to therapy, do more EMDR work. And I'm sitting in my therapist's office, sobbing uncontrollably over the concept of raising my rates and
Yes.
working this out. And what
Mm.
I realized was there was something for sure in my past as a social worker wanting to have wanting to be accessible to everyone, regardless of their ability to
Mm.
pay, right? That was always an intrinsic value of mine because of my training. And personal value, I should say, as well. So,
Yeah.
but it wasn't just that I wanted to be accessible to everyone. There were
Yeah.
so many things related to worth and value. And I can't remember the exact details now about what exactly. Oh, yeah. I was afraid of leaving people behind. I was afraid of abandoning
Mm.
people, right?
Okay, we're going to come to that. There's so many things that I just want to unpack, but I want you to keep going because I'm just like, okay, wow. Yeah, I know that I had to interject and be like, yes, yes, we call it
Yeah.
the fear of losing love in the money magic course, but yes, that is it, leaving
Yeah.
people behind.
Leaving people behind, abandoning people who could use my help, who
Mm.
couldn't afford to pay for it. So the deeper
Mm.
I got into this, the more I realized that as a trauma survivor, simply knowing that people needed support and having a rate where I couldn't support them was like this weird abandonment thing that got triggered in me. And so as I was going through this therapy to try to get myself to being able to earn a wage that would literally just be able to where I could live on it, right? I wasn't making
Yes.
enough money to even live. And I was having
Yeah.
this, right? And so
Yeah.
that was another piece of it, is that I had a hard time charging enough to even give myself what I needed to live at a basic level, right?
Mm.
Right.
Mm.
So
Mm.
prioritizing taking care of other people over myself is another layer.
Mm.
Um, and once I got through that round of EMDR and I raised my rates and I started making money that I could live on.
Yeah.
And thankfully, I will say I am in a 2-partner relationship and my husband has an income. And so I wasn't at a place where we weren't reliant on my income. So I had quite a
Yes.
bit of privilege in working this out,
Mhm.
where, right. So I just want to claim that as well. When
Yeah.
I got on
I
the
think
other,
that's important because it it helps when you're not in survival mode where everything is just not on you and you have support. It helps when we are the only ones that we are reliant on and the business isn't making money. It puts our entire nervous system into severe states of survival, and it sometimes makes it so hard to even think your way out of the process, or even think, let me go get help, or
right,
believe that you can get help.
right, or even being able to afford help, right?
That is
Which
also
is,
a big thing. Yeah.
yeah, so I was in a really privileged position to be able to manage my nervous system and to get support and to work through all of this as I was running my business, because of my household income was able to pay for
Yeah.
everything that we required, right?
Yes.
Um, but I'm such a feminist. I wanted to earn enough money in my own business to have a living wage, right? So
Mm.
there was this little bit of there were too many things at play, I should say. When I
Yeah.
got to the other side of that and I started realizing, because I've always in my work as a coach ended up supporting women. The 6 years I spent working with men in the VA, I kind of flipped and went back to working with women after that. I realized, I mean, when we look at data, when we look at statistics, a lot
Yeah.
of people have trauma, right? Whether we
Yes.
know we have it or not. And
Yes.
I had
Oh,
this,
sorry. I just wanted to clarify for people that like VA is Veterans Association. Am I correct?
it's the
Uh,
Veterans Administration. Yeah.
Veterans Administration. And guys, so if you're not in the US, that's what it stands for. So,
Right. Yeah. So the Veterans Administration is a healthcare organization that provides healthcare and mental health support to military people who are in the military in the US. That's a great clarification. Yeah.
thank you.
So as soon as I got on the other side of that, I could I could then see the way that other people were bumping up against barriers in their work
Mm,
as an entrepreneur because
yes.
their fear was being activated and they
Mm,
weren't necessarily understanding the way that their work as an entrepreneur was activating their fear connected to trauma, because
Yeah.
entrepreneurship is already scary, right? There's so many things that
Yes.
we have to like be brave and overcome our fear and do that work, right?
And sometimes that be brave, overcome your fear, push through it. I often say to people, you re-traumatize yourself. So most people come and like maybe they've had two businesses and they haven't worked out. By the time they come through to work with me or even work with other coaches, they shaking, they scared at the mere mention of entrepreneurship. It's like, well, you've spent so many years pushing through, your nervous system just got re-traumatized, you know? So
Yes.
this is why I'm like, oh my gosh, healing is such a gentle way to move forward. Yes, it's painful to heal and be in the dark things, but it's so much more painful to our entire psyche and nervous system to push through pain and refuse to acknowledge it when everything in us is going like, I'm in pain, I'm scared, this doesn't feel safe.
Right. And there are things that, yeah, we might be a little afraid and need to kind of show up and do it anyway, right? But
Yes.
but there's many, many things connected to the way we might be activated from a trauma perspective that we may not even be aware and understand why that's happening, that is dangerous, that is re-traumatizing, just like you said, if we push through in those moments. And I
Yes.
realized that for myself, when I could be kind and gentle with the true trauma response as it showed up in business, because I was always like, where is this coming from and why is this happening? I internalized feeling bad about myself for having that be the case. But the reality is, I just have a complex trauma history. This is going to happen. I can't keep it from happening. So I started
Yes.
working with it, and I started supporting business owners and working with it and being kind and gentle and noticing the difference of like when to push through and when to not, like when you should not push through and traumatize or cause secondary harm. Um, and I really believe that those of us who have trauma, we come up with really unique, amazing solutions. And we bump up against barriers to being able to experience success that other people don't. And I am just so passionate about it because I really believe that all people, regardless of our experiences, have the ability to be successful in business. But some of
Yes.
us who have a history of trauma, we do need a different approach. We need someone to be
Thank
aware.
you. Yes.
And then from there, I was like, oh my goodness, I need to be teaching coaches how to be trauma sensitive. So we're not accidentally pushing people through things that they shouldn't be pushed through, which is why I ended up
Yeah,
with these
like
two
positive thinking. That
mindset work. Yeah.
I mean, people have heard me on this podcast go ham on that, only just because, guys, I've been one of those people that was re-traumatized by positive thinking and coaches telling me that. Like, I just have to think more positive. So part of the re-traumatization also came from something must be wrong with me. I'm not good enough because this thing is working for everyone. These affirmations and these visualizations are working for everyone, but not me. So then, like, my good enough wound got triggered on top of that. It was very, very intense.
It's very, very complex, actually. One of the other big things for me was visibility. Oh, just do a Facebook Live, just hop on the internet, just tell
Yeah.
people whatever. I'm like, no, it totally shut me down. I mean, I've sat and cried over the thought of doing a Facebook Live. Now I'm in an entirely different place now, but
Yeah.
I had to really do some of that deeper inner work. And I also have had coaches and mentors say things like, just do it, get over it. Just, you gotta, push through. And no, that was really, then when I wasn't making money or having the success that my peers were having, I really internalized, like, I suck as a business owner. I clearly can't do this. I'm not good at it. And that wasn't true either. I
Yeah.
wasn't getting a supportive approach that actually worked with all of the complex facets that make me me, right?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love that. Like, I love that realization that you had that, like, you just weren't working with all the complex things that made you you, right?
Yeah.
Because often it's almost like we feel that to make it, we have to be less us and be more what another coach is teaching, what someone else is doing. And it's not that. Like I often say, when clients say to me, I don't feel comfortable doing Facebook Live and it's scary, I'm like, okay, you have something around visibility. Let's first work on that. But what else do you like to do? And sometimes they're like, well, in my business, I like to write. So I'm like, go write, go blog, go guest blog, go do other things in the meantime. There is no one size fits all strategies. And I think that belief that there is one thing that will make you successful starts to limit us and is what makes us feel like we need to push through even really, really scary situations where it's like you will ball up and cry from doing a Facebook Live. Guys, that's not healthy. It really, really is not healthy. I know that our society teaches that's how you're going to get strong. That's how you're going to keep doing it, keep doing it. If that is happening often and you're not getting through it, and eventually you find yourself so frozen, you can't even imagine a Facebook Live, then something has happened in terms of your nervous system, right? And again, like small fears, different to deep trauma around something, because often we keep ourselves invisible because we don't feel safe being seen. It just doesn't feel safe. And that there's a reason for that. There's a reason why most of us don't want to be seen at all, and we need to work with that and start healing that. So I'm so glad you brought up Facebook Lives.
Yeah, I after I did a bunch of this healing work, I did a 30-day challenge, getting on Facebook Live every day for 30 days.
Yeah.
And so what's interesting is that on the other side of addressing the complexities, looking deeper, doing healing work, having appropriate support, I have then been able to, like, I did Facebook Lives every day for 30 days. And as I did it, like, I was still uncomfortable. I was still a little afraid. I got sweaty, but it didn't shut me down. And so I was able then to do something. And then beyond that, now I have my own podcast. When I first started doing my podcast, I had so many fears about, even just me hearing myself speak out loud, right? Was because I have teaching episodes and then I have interviews. And the times that I would speak out loud, and I record on video as well. So I would be watching myself talk and hearing myself talk at the same time. But I have been able to get to a place to flex the muscle of showing up, owning my voice, knowing I have important things to say, to share, that are valuable, that are worth being a little uncomfortable for in doing it. And sometimes it's just, you're not familiar with it, right? But that's what's cool on the other side, is there can be visibility things if we tend to our unique, I like to say, unique requirements, and get the right support. Now, some people may have the right support and attend to their unique requirements and still never do Facebook Lives. So I'm not saying that you can do anything you put your mind to, because some things just aren't the right fit for us, right? But boy, it was cool and liberating to see that some of those things were accessible to me, in pushing through a little bit, but only once it was safe, only once I was grounded and healed enough and okay enough to do it. So that's an interesting element as well to healing as a part of entrepreneurship.
That is a very interesting element. Like, so excited that you brought this up, because I think the next question that maybe people listening are wondering about is, how do you tell when something is a little scary and when your nervous system is shutting down? Is there a cue that they can take, especially because we have the push through culture? So I think it's disconnected us from our bodies so much, and we've been taught, like, if you just think it and if you want it, my worst one is, if you want it hard enough, you'll be able to do it.
Mm-mm.
Is there anything more awful than that? Like, honestly, because it literally implies that people around the world who are unable to do certain things just don't want that thing hard enough,
Yeah.
or don't really want it. So how can people listening in know when something is shutting them down, or when it's just a fear that they can work through?
Yeah. I just want to speak to that. That is such a harmful thing to say. I have wanted to be successful in business and spent
Mm,
60 to 80 hours a week hustling
mm,
my ass off. I
yeah,
wanted to make it happen and I
yeah,
couldn't. Like
yep.
there wasn't anything about my commitment and my effort and my pull yourself
Mm,
up by the bootstraps, get it done.
yeah.
It did not work for me. And I
Mm,
really internalized that there was something wrong with me. Maybe I just didn't
yeah,
want it hard, like, oh, that's such a
true.
harmful thing. So thank you so much for bringing that up, because that is entirely wrong. Sometimes we just need certain things to be able to then
Yeah.
get on the other side. Okay. So you said the word shut down, and I feel like that is a really good term to explain what happens, but I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in depth. Is
Mm,
when I have very big emotional reactions to things that are out of context for the situation,
mm,
or are not how I typically respond,
mm,
that's a cue for me something else is going on here.
mm,
I am probably experiencing a trauma trigger that I'm not aware of. And what's interesting about the subconscious mind is that there can be things that activate the fear center in our brain from a subconscious place, sight, sound,
yes,
smell, something happening in our environment that we're not cognitively aware of, that activates true
mm,
trigger response,
yes,
which then causes a shutdown. But what happens for me is that there will be times where I feel an extreme kind of way and it doesn't make sense in the situation, right?
mm,
Or I am
yes,
like, anytime I feel confused or I'm responding in a way that is atypical for me, the first thing I think is like, something's wrong, I'm crazy, right? Like, and
yeah,
then the way I experience, the way it happens to me is I feel like I get hit by a tsunami, and
yes,
then I get on the other side of this extreme emotional reaction, and I feel like
mm,
I collect all my bits and pieces back together, and then all of a
yes,
sudden I'm like, whoa, what just happened? Why did I say
mm,
that? Why did I respond like that? How did that go down like that? Then I feel
yes,
ashamed and I feel bad. And it's because it's literally out of character for me to behave or to say or to be emotional in that kind of way. But in the
yeah,
moment, it's impulsive because it's a trigger. I don't have
mm,
control always in the moment. The
yes,
more I'm aware, the better I can sense when these things are happening and
mm,
notice and pause and take care of myself in whatever way I might need, which is always different given the situation
yes,
at play. Um, but I can't always do that. So sometimes what ends up happening is we have to get to the other side of an extreme response, or an atypical response. And then we have to be kind and gentle to ourselves. And then we have to notice,
mm,
well, what happened? We can't prevent these things from occurring. But when they do, then we can start learning a little bit about the way in which we get activated, the way in which we get triggered, and
yeah,
what we might need in those situations.
yeah,
Um, I had a really complex trauma response a few months ago, and it took me 2 weeks to try to figure out it took me 2 weeks to figure out what was going on with me. Two
yes,
whole weeks.
yep.
I've had other
It can
incidents.
take that long. It
Yeah.
can. We always say on this podcast that it can take days, it takes weeks. They've heard guests talk about that. when it's complex, it's complex. I mean, like if it was something that was easily intellectualized, you wouldn't be reacting the way that you are, right? You would be just like able to stop yourself halfway through, or even just like 10% of the way into the reaction and just like change behavior. But because it's such a deep trauma and such a deep trigger, it's difficult to almost stop in the midst of our response. And that's why we reflect afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I want to just reiterate how important it is for people to know that we can't prevent these things from occurring. We can do some healing and it can shift sometimes, but it's more important to be aware and to be really kind and gentle and to start learning the way in which your unique stuff is presented and the unique needs that you have in those moments, and then doing your best to tend to yourself and care for yourself, and then forgive yourself, or be able to, like, one of the things I've had to do with my husband is come back to him after I've gotten really angry or I've been really intense and I've said certain things that are actually not in alignment with how I think and feel normally, but in that moment felt very strongly, right? To go back and say, hey, well, and the piece that's been very hard for me, honestly, in my relationship is to say, the reason why this is occurring is because I have this unique trauma and that impacts me in this way. And it shows up like this for us. And I'm sorry, right? I wish that wasn't the case, but this is actually like what I live with all the time. Because I have been so ashamed of the things that have happened to me and the way that those things show up and impact me and impact my relationships. I do not want people to know. I can now say I'm a trauma survivor and I can be transparent about that.
Yeah.
But I have had to work a lot around my shame of and my willingness to say it out loud.
Yes.
Now, I don't do this everywhere, right? But with him, there's certain things that he needs to know about why I am the way I am sometimes. And like, it's not making an excuse for my behavior, but it's contextually helping him get it. And like, when I say I'm sorry, I'm not bypassing the situation. I'm not giving myself a free pass. I'm not trying to justify my behavior. It's just like for him to better understand me and for me to better understand myself, right? Oh, that takes so much vulnerability to have those kinds of conversations.
So much, because I think when we're doing that, we don't know if the person is going to accept us or reject us, right? And I've had moments where I've had to do that also in relationships or in friendships or even with my siblings. It's like, yeah, we grew up in the same household, but my response to certain things can be so wild, because of how we all process trauma. And some of their responses to certain things will have me like going like, what? So we've had to learn to have that unpacking. And I think it takes a lot of vulnerability and trust, that this person is still going to accept you. So most of us are scared to do that because we're like, will I lose this love if I come forth? Will the person still look at me the same way? Will they think less of me? So I think that's where some of the difficulties come from.
If they really knew what happened to me, the ways in which I'm broken.
Yes,
right?
Yes. Like I am not as put together as they think I am. And I think this is why so many of us have this deep need to appear perfect. And we're so scared of having even one hair out of place and someone seeing that, because, wow, that means that they will see that I am flawed. And am I now lovable? Because I think one of the biggest fears of humans is how we were scared that, like, if there's something wrong, in inverted commas, with us, then we are no longer lovable, And I think one of the hardest things in life is that most of us have been brought up in households where when we weren't good kids and doing the right thing, love was withdrawn, certain promises were revoked. And that now makes us feel like, as adults, oh my gosh, if I am not perfect, the same thing will happen with our relationships, with people that we're relationshiping with, be it romantic, friendships, siblings, all that. But that's only because that's how we were taught love works. And it's taken me so long to, I'm still unraveling that, but I've gotten better over the years because literally I have a mother that does that, right? So if I'm not perfect, I'm not good enough, she takes away love. And she did that all the time as a child. So if I'd been promised to go somewhere and I really wanted to go, if I did something bad or terrible, then no, that's no longer happening. So as an adult, I came into adulthood with that fear in relationships. Like, oh, if they find out I'm not this perfect human, that's it. Like, I should just prepare for a breakup.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate you bringing up this control and perfectionism thing, because that's such a trauma response. And controlling things, identifying, mitigating, and preventing things, right? Because that's a way, at least it has been for me, to manage. Like, if I can
Yes.
control these things, then I know that I can handle that. I can manage
Yep.
that. That is something that I'll be able to tolerate, right?
Yes.
And or the perfectionism of like, if I'm perfect, then that's one of the ways that I can prevent something bad from happening, right?
All the time. That used to be my entire psyche.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. And it takes so much mental and emotional energy
Yeah.
that then is not available to do the healing work. And then the other piece, it's like, yes, there's this thing around external love, right? But I've struggled a lot. I've always, people have always perceived me as being very confident, and I am. I am a very confident person. However, I have not loved myself well. I have not felt good about myself inside. I
I
have
think so
had to,
many of us can resonate with that. I just want to acknowledge that.
yeah,
Mm.
I've had to really, really work on learning how to love myself,
Mm.
despite the fact that things have happened to me, right? I mean,
Mm.
it's such a trauma response to take responsibility. Like, those things, if I had done X, Y, and Z, those things wouldn't have happened. Therefore, it's
Yeah.
my fault, right?
Yes.
And then sometimes we're told it's your fault, which is also not true, right? Abuse
True.
is never our fault. And so
Mm.
that self-love piece, and we're in a just love yourself, self-love culture, and it
Yeah.
is not easy, it is not straightforward, it drives me
Yeah.
crazy because it's a very long, arduous journey to get to the point to really, really love yourself most of the time. you
Yeah.
know
And I grew up in a community. I don't know about other people's communities, but in my community, it was always like a girl who does not love herself. And it was like shunned. If someone did something, they were like, oh, that girl does not love herself. As if like we grow up in societies that teach us to love ourselves, just we're constantly being told that there's something wrong with us. So the very same community that was like, you must love yourself, was always like pointing out flaws, like, oh, she's not the right weight, oh, she's too short, this, and then you're like, yeah, and now you wonder why this girl doesn't love herself. Like, what the heck? But there is also that whole thing that most of us are scared to own, that I haven't loved myself for a long time, and now I'm on this journey to love myself, and please can someone help me do this, because there is that element of shaming if we don't.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and there's not a lot of role models, true role models of people who embody self-love and self-acceptance and self-confidence in healthy, balanced ways where they get to be everything that they are, and that's not only is it okay, but it's amazing,
I
right?
love that.
There's not a lot of places where we see that embodied.
Mm.
So because we need to be a certain body shape and size, we
Yeah.
need to communicate in a certain way. Like there's
Mm.
so many expressed and unexpressed parameters around what's okay and what's not okay. and i
Mm.
and i think that this is true regardless of where you live and what your religion is and where you like your community.
Mm.
Those guidelines might be a little different, but
Yeah.
there are guidelines, right?
There are guidelines. Oh my gosh. And that's the thing, we all have guidelines. And I used to think that these guidelines were maybe wildly different across cultures. But the more that I've traveled, I'm like, they tend to be very similar, especially when it comes to women.
Yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. Yes. The other thought that's coming to me is aspects around religion, and
Yes.
or belief systems. So many of those are patriarchal, um, and
Yeah.
that serves men in a way it doesn't serve women. I have a unique experience. I was raised literally in a cult, a
Oh
very
my
bizarre
goodness.
spinoff of a Christianity, and so
Wow.
so religion, I think, is also an important thing. And now there's spiritual belief systems, and some of those can be really wonderful and healthy. But some of our religious systems can be pretty harmful.
Oh,
Also in
we talk a lot about religious trauma on this
Oh,
podcast.
good, good. Good, of course.
A part of my work, I have like a body of work called the God wound. So we diagnose a religious trauma. We also diagnose our own inability to see our own divinity. So even if we didn't grow up religious, like I wasn't brought up religious, I grew up like my mom practiced African spirituality. So we spoke a lot to our ancestors and stuff. In later years, she's since found Catholicism, which has been an interesting trip to observe. But we were
I bet.
already out of the house, living on our own. So we just, as adults, were observing her journey with that. But she still is very much practicing African spirituality as well. My dad has been a non-believer in all things. So although his belief is in Confucianism, so that's been very, very interesting because he would tell us about Confucius, and I was like this child that was growing up and learning about Confucius. But yes, there is a lot around spiritual, not even just religious trauma, also like spiritual trauma, people that are coming from new age belief systems that, again, like what we speak about, the re-traumatization of like, oh, you weren't grateful enough, etc. So having to unpack that. So yeah, that also impacts us and how we approach the world. Yeah,
Mm,
I love this podcast because we talk a lot about that as well.
that's awesome. Of course you do. That's great.
So, Lisa, I just wanted to backtrack. There are two things that I wanted to ask about. So, let me ask about the first one because I'm sure people have written it down and are circling it. Like, people send me messages and say they listen to this podcast with a cup of coffee, notebooks, and a pen, and they write down notes, So,
That's
people
awesome.
send me long feedbacks on things because they just like, this is what I got from today's podcast. So, guys, before you go stop the podcast and go Google EMDR, I wanted Lisa to explain it. It's a healing modality, but I want her to unpack it and talk about why it's so powerful.
Okay, so I have utilized EMDR, and I actually teach around. I teach coaches what it is,
Mm,
from a conceptual basis, just so that if a coach has someone who they're working with who needs more trauma therapy or healing
mm,
work in a therapeutic modality, because there's many ways to heal trauma, not just through
yes,
therapy.
true.
But I don't have those notes in front of me exactly, and I'm not an expert, but I will do my very best off the top of my head. So, and
Please
based on
do. We're just grateful to be educated.
yeah, and based on my own experience. So, EMDR is emotional eye movement desensitization reprocessing, I believe is what the 4 letters stand for. And
Mm.
it is a process, and it's a multiple stage process, and it's pretty intense, where you begin with sharing some of your story of who you are and your basic understanding of what your experiences have been,
Mm.
where your disruptions because of your experiences have arrived. So it's kind of the first part. You develop a relationship with your therapist. You start to give some history, and the therapist starts to identify where some of your root trauma triggers, responses, or where some reprocessing could occur. Because what happens is, and of course, this is different than depending on when your trauma occurs, where you're at in your developmental phase, things can happen differently in the way that you process information. But in a traumatic moment, your brain processes that because of how intense it is in a way that is different than how your brain processes information and experiences and emotions typically. So what happens is that there actually ends up being I'll just call it a stuck spot with where this experience has been processed in your brain that can literally be reprocessed. So from left brain to right brain. And the therapist identifies a couple of those places where, and for me, it is like I had certain fears or certain, what's the right word? Intrusive thoughts or intense emotional reactions to things that I could never not experience. Like they always haunted me. I could not escape from them. Right.
Yes, yes.
And those were anchored in certain memories. And so the therapist helps you identify those memories.
Yes.
Once those memories are identified, and the way my therapist explained it to me is when you can reprocess that memory, it might actually release a bunch of other tangent memories connected to it that you don't know, right?
Yep. Yep.
But those memories can be very hard memories. So the reprocessing piece, you have visual stimulation, visual, tactile, and audible stimulation. So you
Yes.
hold little things that vibrate in your hand. You have headphones in that does a beep on one side, and then you watch a light where the light tracks, and all of that is stimulating physiologically your right hemisphere of your brain and your left hemisphere of your brain as you're remembering your memory to be able to move it to the healthier part of processing. If that makes any sense. And again, I would love to have a therapist who actually does this, listen to this. Hopefully I'm getting this right. This is just my
so
experience.
fascinating.
Yeah.
I know of EMDR, but I've never done it. I've got several friends that have been doing it though, and they say it is incredible. They love it.
Yeah, it's intense. So in my experience, we identified a couple memories, and these were very, very hard memories, right? Brought up extreme emotion, much distress. So a part of the beginning process is being safe enough and connected enough to your therapist where your therapist can hold space for you to go into that traumatic memory and re-experience it, because it is a little re-traumatizing to do that. The other part is being able to then set you up to know so that you can cope and you can manage your emotion and the integration outside of the session as well. But while you do remember the memory and have this tactile stimulation, I had a couple instances where when I would begin, I would say I'm at a 10 out of 10 with emotional distress. I would remember the memory, have the tactile, visual, hearing stimulation, and sometimes all three is too much and people can only handle one.
Yes.
Then I would get to it and I would think about the memory at the end, and I would have gone from a 10 out of 10 to of distress to a 6.
Wow.
We'd do it again and I could get to a 1 or a 2 or a 0.
Wow.
And then literally it was like I was then freed from that intense emotional reaction that I didn't have any control over, that I then I literally don't experience those emotional, extreme, intense reactions to certain memories and experiences that I've had.
Yes.
Liberating, so incredibly liberating.
Whew, that is amazing.
Which is why it's so incredibly powerful. And then the therapist then also, as a part of the process, teaches you how to cope when emotional distress comes up related to trauma triggers, how you handle that, how you take care of that, right? And for me, I've gone through 2 different rounds of EMDR because I had different memories that, like, as you heal, things shift and then other stuff can surface a little. And I have pretty complex stuff throughout many different phases and places in my life. So that is one of the ways, that is my version of EMDR, at least my experience of it. And it was so liberating. Like, there's still times where I want to call or write my therapist letters or send her flowers because I feel such a massive sense of gratitude for not being paralyzed by those things anymore. Like, they am literally liberated from the intensity of that
Nothing
experience.
beats that. Do you know how often I tell my coaches that? I just thank them and thank them and thank them, like, because it literally is priceless, the things that healers can do for us, be it therapy, healers, our coaches. There is no amount of money. Sometimes, like, I tell my trauma coach that, I'm like, there really isn't, it's because you know what it's like to live in that debilitating state, and then to live in a state where you're relatively free. Oh my gosh, it's like night and day.
Yeah. So much more is available if your ability to experience the potency of joy and life, and to not be held back or influenced by some of the things that when those really, really intense things happen, and then they're not happening anymore, it's like we have this access in a whole other way, which is such a beautiful, wonderful thing to be able to then really enjoy life and have happiness. And
Yeah. Oh
not
my
that we can't have
gosh.
happiness if we don't go through trauma healing, but I think you understand what I'm saying. We just have more access to
And
more of the
you just,
goodness.
to be able to hold more
Yeah.
emotionally, and to be able to process more emotionally. Because I think here's the thing with trauma, it completely, like, our allostatic load is completely just like full, right? I don't know if that's the right terminology, but I don't have the right words for it. But we are overloaded in terms of our nervous system and all the things that we have in our bodies, right, guys? I'm just gonna talk normally. So imagine your body is like this cupboard. Is that the right word? But, like, let's talk about that. And you're holding all, and every time you have, like, all these memories come in, there's something getting slotted into different shelves, but at the same time, some things are being slotted in messily, not at all folded up, and so they take up more space than all the other things, and it's just messy. And as you start to heal, all those things that are taking up all the space get neatly folded up, tucked up. You're like, oh, I can look at them now. They all clean, they get ironed, you put them back into the closet. And so now you suddenly have more space to be able to take in more, to have more experiences, because as those experiences are coming in, they're coming into now a closet that is almost half empty, because now you've got more space. So this is why we do the work. So this is what I mean by you can hold more, you can process more, you can go out and be more in the world, because things don't trigger you as much, because you don't have the messily folded up clothes. I don't know, like, that's just an analogy that came to me, but that's what it feels like. So, Lisa, when you started, so this is my second last question, but when you started, you talked about having PTSD. And I know a lot of people, we've always associated PTSD with something like, exactly, like veterans and Vietnam vets or people that have gone to war. And most of us don't even understand that you can have PTSD as just yourself. Can you please explain how that happens? Like, what is PTSD? Because I think PTSD is one of those big words that that has always fallen in with the idea of like trauma being, you've gone through war, you've gone through the most horrific things, and that is what trauma is. Meanwhile, it's not always the horrific, gory stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Boy, I wish I had all of my research and notes.
Sorry.
No,
Sorry to
good.
put you on the spot.
That's okay. It's a good challenge. So PTSD is a post-traumatic stress disorder. People can have post-traumatic stress responses and or presentation without the disorder element of it. PTSD is actually falls in the DSM, which is the American Psychological Diagnostic, whatever that manual is called. They changed the name. So the diagnostic criteria for PTSD actually falls under an anxiety disorder. And what it is, when you have some pretty extreme ability to function in your day-to-day life as a result of how the trauma that you experienced impacted you. So you can have intrusive thoughts, you can have high levels of anxiety, you can experience depression, you can have intrusive thoughts, you can have flashbacks, you can have difficulty being in certain places, being avoidant of certain places because you have a flashback. And so what ends up happening is that PTSD is actually where your ability to function day to day and navigate your life is impacted enough that it's not, I don't want to say normal because I don't like the word normal. I don't think there's anything really normal or abnormal.
True, I agree. That word doesn't really apply.
Yeah, it doesn't apply. But when your typical functioning and your typical ability to manage your life is impacted by the severity of a traumatic experience or multiple traumatic experiences that you have had.
Yes.
And it also really can impact your ability to manage relationships.
Yes.
Because of fear, because of trust, because of need to control, right? So
that was me for years and years. Even maintaining relationships, because, well, if they finally know me, like I said, then they won't like me. So I'll always keep you at a distance so that you never know the real me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and so that like being guarded for sure. Yeah. For me, and then one of the other things that can be true is disassociation. So literally kind of leaving your body and not remembering certain experiences or sections of time in your day because you, from a coping mechanism, your fear center got activated so much that you leave your body. And that can be something that in the moment of a traumatic experience can be a really helpful coping mechanism, but then that can occur later because of the intensity and the re-trigger, like when the triggers occur. And then that makes it hard to remember, like when certain things have happened, what did you do? What did you say? How did you behave? And then that can impact, relationship.
Even memory blocks, right? Because I have so many clients and students that come to me and say, I don't remember my childhood. It's like when you ask me about primary school or high school or what happened when you were 16, they literally like, I have no memory. Yeah. And I was like that for the longest while when it came to my childhood and even my teens. It was, my memories were little, just like flashes of things. I didn't remember a lot of things. And when I started to heal, what really shocked me was how many memories and incidents I remembered and started to see, but so many of them were so scary and so traumatic, you know? So one of the things is really like not remembering childhood memories. I mean, usually the students that do eventually remember, not eventually, but once they do start remembering, it's always wow. The stories that come out are just really intense. It's how we protect ourselves.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting. I've done a massive amount of healing as well, and I still can't remember hardly anything before the age of 8. I still have like you said, little flashes from here and there, maybe a memory or two a year before the age of like 8 to 10 and below, like from birth until then. And actually the memories that I have mostly are just stories of things that people have said. I don't actually have much memory from my entire childhood. So that's the other thing that I think is fascinating, because I would like to have some of those. Some things I also have remembered that I would rather have not remembered, right? That like came from healing, and it also like were hard memories to remember. But even through a lot of healing, we can still have a significant absence of memory. And that can
Thank
be
you
really,
for bringing that up. Yeah.
and a part of it has to do with like when you are young, when you experience significant trauma in those early developmental phases of life, that can also, so that's another thing that's interesting is if you have an early childhood trauma and a secondary or multiple traumas later in your life, the more you have over the course of time, or the severity, that can also impact whether or not you actually develop PTSD. Many people may experience symptoms of PTSD, but not actually like be diagnosed. And
I
so,
was smiling because I saw the dog. Man, gosh, guys, if you're watching on YouTube, you get to see the golden retriever. Wow, what a beauty.
thank you. She's such a sweet, sweet girl. My favorite friend. What else did I want to say? Yeah, I actually had to reach out to my therapist because I went to a free clinic where I was able to get support, and they didn't do diagnosis. They didn't actually diagnose people because they weren't utilizing insurance companies. And they also didn't want to give people labels, right? But I reached out to her later and said, I actually have, from a diagnostic criteria, I have PTSD, right? And she said, yes, you have absolutely met criteria for the diagnosis of PTSD at some point in your life, right? And so it felt important to me to know that, because it validated the like, oh, there isn't anything wrong with me. I'm not crazy. I'm not making this up. Like I knew I wasn't, but I internalized a lot of like, there's something wrong with me stuff. And knowing that diagnosis was true for me was really helpful. It's like, oh, this makes sense now, right? Like I'm not making excuses. This, like literally, I need certain things for certain reasons because I require them, not because I'm high maintenance or I can't adapt or I can't be flexible, right? No, I literally require certain things. So,
No, I'm so glad you said that, because I think that is a big thing. Like I used to walk around for years when I didn't understand trauma, how it plays out. I used to think I was just a freak. Like, why could I not respond normally to life events? And I mean, I don't know if I shared this in the mastermind before, but I used to have like panic attacks dealing with money and managing money. And that for me, I remember like thinking, I'm a freak. Like people won't understand why I can't send out invoices, why I curl up when people ask for my pricing, why like my entire system freezes when people say, what is the price of this service? And I'm just like, so I used to think all these things just made me weird. Why, like, I just didn't respond in certain ways when it came to dating and things like that. And I started doing the trauma work, and he was like, wow, okay, I get it. I see it, I understand it. And it helped me develop such deep compassion for myself, which was a good step in the self-love journey, because I stopped beating myself up. I stopped berating myself. It was like, of course. And so much of this has happened to you from a young age. You were powerless. You couldn't stop a lot of these events. But now they're showing up this way and you're healing them. But it's awesome. Like, you get to sit with that. And I think for me, if anything, that's what trauma is, the healing journey has helped me find that compassion for myself. Because for years I couldn't find it. And I would just like talk horribly to myself. Just do it. This is such a simple thing. Like, it's just sending out an email. It's just responding. What's wrong with you? I'd say those things in the mirror, And now it's like, of course, like, I get it. I see you. Okay, let's see where this is coming from. So much better.
The other thing that I find really helpful is when, so I like to talk to my little self. I call her little Lisa.
Yeah.
And there are times where I have a trauma response, or I'm starting to experience something that is seemingly atypical. I don't really understand why it's happening. And I'll say, hey, little Lisa, like, what do you need? Because in my attempts at coping in life, I have ignored some of my basic needs, or maybe what my little self needed, just in trying to like get through and to cope, where there are times I feel like my little self doesn't trust me, doesn't believe me, right? And so there are times where I have to say to little Lisa, I promise I'm not going to continue to give you the rest, the nutrition, the kindness, the generosity, the whatever you need. But right now, today, we do need to work hard to get a couple things done. But this doesn't mean I'm neglecting you, right? Or that I'm not listening to you telling me that like we're tired right now. Yes, I know, right? So that's also been a really cool thing for me in learning to trust myself. Right. Because it can be hard to trust ourselves because of the way that we're naughty in our head, or the way we neglect ourselves, or the way we just try to get through life and coping. Oh, this has been such a great conversation.
It has been. So, Lisa, I'm sure people are like, oh my God, this woman is amazing. I need to get her into my life. How do people get hold of you? How do they work with you? Wow, this has been incredible.
Yeah. So it's easy. My website is lisakuzman.com, LISAKUZMAN. My email address is lisa@lisakuzman.com.
Oh,
On
nice.
my Facebook business page is Lisa Kuzman Leadership Expert. And on Instagram, I'm Coach Kuz, which is just a little bit different there. So, and I do have a podcast as well. So my podcast,
oh, yes, please do share it.
Yeah, it's called Serving It Hot. And it's where I dish the deets about how to lead in today's online world. And we talk about a lot of behind the scenes things and issues that leaders face. I'm so excited to have you come on as a guest here soon.
Yeah, guys, I'm going to be a guest on Lisa's podcast. Do not worry. I'm going to be sharing it. I'm going to be sharing the link so you guys have access to it. I'm going to share it to the mailing list as well. So yeah, thank you so much, Lisa. I think, wow, the people that come on this show share such incredible, life-changing information. I am forever grateful. So thank you for being one of those guests and for just being so generous with everything that you are sharing. So, Money Magicians, if you have enjoyed this, please go to iTunes and give us a 5-star rating, leave us a review, tell us what you've loved about the podcast, the guests, any questions that you would have loved to have addressed that I can ask other guests. You can also ask that. Thank you for the YouTube comments. We greatly appreciate them. Also go to Podbean, leave us comments, and of course, share this with your family and friends. If you really love this episode, please share it with an entrepreneur that you know is struggling financially and maybe just spinning their wheels and not understanding why they can't do simple things, like the Facebook Lives, writing a post, sharing their pricing, invoicing clients, all that, because this may actually help them understand that there's nothing wrong with them. So thank you for tuning in. And as usual, if you want to learn how to heal ancestral money trauma and you're loving these podcast guests and you want to work more around ancestral money trauma and falling in love with your bank account, do check out the Money Magic course at wealthy-money.com/money magic. Again, wealthy-money.com/money magic. I will see you again next week with another incredible guest. Cheerio.